Hi, my name is Ed Marx. I serve as the Chief Digital Officer for Tech Mahindra Health and Life Sciences, and I want to welcome you to another one of our webinars, this one focused on race relations, the perspective of a Black professional on the technology firm side of healthcare IT. As you know, we've been in a series of conversations about what's taking place, nationally, globally, in terms of talking about race and racism in the workplace. And we've intentionally focused just on health IT since that's our sphere of influence. And so if we can make a difference here, it'll obviously impact further out into the other parts of our society. So that's what we're really focused on. So I want to welcome you again. I'm really excited to have this discussion from the angle of a technology firm provider, a professional, and learn. And again, the purpose of our entire series is really to raise awareness that the fact that there is something that needs to be done. We cannot continue down the same route. And one of the best ways, I think, to really address the racism question head on or situation head on is to talk about it. So as you know, we've had several other guests. We've had Cletus Earl, a CIO, talk about his perspectives. We've had Myra Davis talk about her perspective, not only as a Black person, but a female also in the CIO role. Last time, we welcomed Dr. Tope Fatatui, and he spoke about his perspective from a medical professional. And today, I'm so excited, Chris Hemphill will be joining us to talk about it again from the technology firm side. So I'm going to ask a first question that allowed Chris to introduce himself. I will just say that Chris and I had the opportunity to meet, I don't know, Chris, was it like 2 years ago, 3 years ago? We met someplace in Ohio, and we just had this great conversation, and we just hit it right off like natural friends, and talking a little bit about tech and directions like that. So with that said, Chris, please introduce yourself, and then tell us your journey, as a young Black professional, how you got into the industry and where you are today and what you do.
Okay, fantastic, and yeah, it was great meeting you. Though it may seem like it might have been 3, 4, 5 years ago, 2020 is actually like, I think we're like 10 years into 2020 now, so that might influence a little bit. It's been just about a year. But again, happy to be a guest on this show, and happy to be a part of maintaining a focus on, if we lose focus, if our focus on people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, if that's only in the moment that it happens, then we'll go back into our day-to-days and not lose focus on a problem that's existed for hundreds of years and it's just now getting a serious spotlight. So just a personal introduction, where I'm coming from. Today, you might see it on the screen today, my focus is on client-facing data science projects at a technology company called Symphony RM, which is focused on analytics within healthcare to drive next best actions for hospital systems, for patients and providers. My experience ranges. It's actually a little bit of a strange story. I got into my entry point into healthcare was actually from a sales perspective, and that got me in touch. Well, constantly having conversations with healthcare leaders across the country. But then I moved more into an operations and analytics role in support of the sales team, so sales operations, and then eventually down the data science path. So it's a kind of a strange, I hadn't heard of too many people coming in from sales and then going into data science, but that was my journey. And it was always fueled just by a curiosity on what, I'm always obsessed with the question why. I think that probably started with the book Freakonomics, which pointed out a whole bunch of counterintuitive things about the way that we see the world and approach the world, and it just always made me ask the question of where data, where we can get data to like really prove out these these examples of how we understand the world. But that's it in a nutshell. My background in a nutshell.
No, that's great. And just a reminder to our audience, we are live, and we do live for two reasons. One is we want to interact with you. So if you have any questions, you know how to do this by now. You can go in and ask questions, and I'll certainly take a look at that as the 30 minutes rolls by really quickly. So if you do have a question, the earlier you get it in, the more likely we are to be able to address it. We did get a couple ahead of time, so thank you for that. And we will plan to address those as well. So don't hesitate. Oh yeah, and the second reason we do it live is it's just more fun, and see what happens. So, and I'm totally unscripted. So there's not a script we're following. So it really is a serious dialogue, but we have a good time with it as well. So, one of the things, Chris, that I've asked most of our guests on this topic, because most, I don't have a specific statistic, but I would say most from observation of the healthcare IT leaders today are non-Black. They're white like I am. The majority, again, I can't put a percentage on it, are good people who are not, wouldn't actively be considered a racist or someone who discriminates. But yet each one of us is susceptible to bias. And I had this aha moment a few years ago when I was at my former employer. I've read a book called Blind Spots, and I realized, oh my gosh, I thought I was like, I didn't think I had bias, but oh my gosh, I do. And so I started like doing a lot of deep introspection and trying to change. But one thing that really helps is just to understand the perspective of people that are not like you. So in this case, we're talking about racism and Black specifically. So I don't know, and many of my colleagues wouldn't know what it's like to be a Black person. And so it's really important to get your perspective. So like I said, we got kind of the CIO perspective and CMIO perspective. What is it like to, what's your experience like? What's that voice of the Black man, Black person who's on the technology firm side, or some people would say vendors or suppliers or partners, working in this industry? Because we all assume it's the same experience that we're having as non-Black, and I don't know that that's the case.
I have to assure you, it really isn't the case, because where race is always on my mind, and whenever I'm entering a room, that's a calculation that I make. When I bring that up to peers, or when I bring that up to other people in industry, or just other people that aren't Black, it doesn't seem to be as strong a question on their mind. So I just want the world to know that, like, when it comes to the racial makeup of a company, or the racial makeup of a room walking in, or a sales team coming in to have a discussion, it's visible, it's 100% thought about. So if anybody has any doubts about, like, if there's a diverse team that you're presenting to, and an all white staff comes in to do the presentation, it's 100% noticed. And a lot of times, like, it's not exactly the most comparable thing in the world. I'll say this also, I was born in Alabama, so the Southeast, and one thing that we always talk about is how there's the type of racism that exists in Alabama versus the type of racism that exists elsewhere. It always seems like people in regions outside of the Southeast kind of look down on the Southeast in terms of being much more racist and much more discriminatory than the others. But the truth really is that the type of racism that we experience in Alabama, I live in Georgia right now, but in Alabama, people tend to be a lot more overt, a lot more obvious. So it makes it easier to understand and know who to avoid. I'm glad that books like Blind Spot are opening the world to people's unconscious biases, because I think that once people have the scapegoat of the Southeast, it makes it much easier to deflect their own thoughts onto other people. But in truth, racism is pervasive all the way across the nation. And if it's in the more subtle and insidious form, then it's harder for people to protect themselves against. And there's also a concept that this doesn't get discussed very much, but there's also the concept of internalized racism. Like if you do a Google search, Google images search for handsome man, if you just type handsome man into Google, then you're going to see a wall of white men. And it might sound like, okay, who cares, whatever, it's a Google image search, but it's like being exposed in a society to where there is there's a dominant force, and that's the one that is preferred, that's the handsome one, that's the beautiful one, that's the one to look up upon. It creates what's called an internalized racism. And internalized racism is biases that seep in to Black people against two Black people against other Black people. So I pay attention not only to what I might be experiencing in the room or what somebody else is doing, but also I would hope that one thing people take away from this is to, no matter what, always be checking for your biases. Even if you're part of an underrepresented group, the way underrepresented groups are represented could lead to internalized bias. So everybody has a potential and responsibility to make sure that we're checking ourselves and checking our own biases.
No, that's powerful. I mean, that's great insight, and that's what we're trying to get out of this dialogue is, see, I wouldn't think ever twice about what you just shared, like Google, beautiful man, beautiful woman, and that it would be white, and that, so we don't think about it. And so, Chris, if you were in, as like, let's say you're a CIO, big health system, or it doesn't have to be a big health system, small health system, whatever. What would you want others to know about working with a Black professional on the technology firm side? So you know it because you live it. Now, if you were to reverse the role, is what I'm trying to say, what advice would you offer, like people like me? Like, how can let's just say I have an unconscious bias. What can I be looking for in myself or do to help the situation?
I think the absolute first thing, like if somebody wants to help, I mean, there's tons of people out there who have good spirits and good souls, but when they're confronted with an issue that they bring up, or somebody is off-put by a joke that they make or some comment that they say that they consider innocuous, they go onto the defensive. So what's the cost of that, going onto the defensive when somebody brings something up? Well, if somebody knows that somebody's going to be constantly going on the defensive, then they're just not going to bring that thing up anymore, especially if you're in a position of power. The big challenge with being in a position of power is understanding where the truth is coming from and separating fact from fiction. Well, if you're in a position of power over me, then I might not be, and it doesn't seem like a welcoming environment. I'm not going to be as communicative, and there's a problem with retention when that happens. If people don't feel like they have a safe environment where they can be themselves and be comfortable, then they're going to get scared at some point, or it's just going to take a mental tax on them that they start looking for the exit. So the advice to counterbalance that is to if confronted with some information, is to step back and ask why, like pause for a second, because of course our first instinct is to feel like we're being attacked, like, oh well, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist or homophobic, I'm being attacked in this scenario. But I'm 100%. I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s with all the edgy humor and everything like that, with all the super offensive jokes, and I used to find that funny and go around saying that kind of stuff. But when ultimately, like if a friend called me out on that, I would initially be defensive. But then the more important question is, why would somebody, like, oh, this is completely innocuous thing. Why would somebody be off-put by this innocuous thing? If you instead of jumping to the defense and feeling attacked, but instead asking why, somebody would attack on that basis, that establishes a strong layer. That should be a solid foundation to start looking for why people take these particular things in an offensive manner. So the best thing that I could offer, or like this really helped me with my own biases and the way that I treated or interacted with others, or the types of things I would say, or the types of jokes that I would make, is stepping back and asking if somebody said that they were offended, instead of getting on the defense and saying, oh no, this is from a pristine and pure position, I'm such a great person. No, investigate why they feel that way, and don't it's not a matter of putting them on the spot to say, well, why would you say that, blah 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 blah. It's a matter of knowing that like putting them on the spot even puts even more pressure on them, puts the burden on them to educate you, and they already feel like they're in a disadvantaged situation. It has to be a genuine question where in each scenario you go on, you do your own research and figure it out, and then learn how to better empathize with those people in the other underrepresented groups.
Yeah, so that's really good practical advice. And what I'm also hearing out of it is that you have to take a stand. You have to take action. You cannot sit back, especially if you're a leader, and just like let it go by without confronting it. You've got to call it out. You have to take a stand. You know, when there is responsibility that comes with leadership, and it's about equity as well as many other things, and you need to take a stand for everyone. And if you don't, you're complicit. So I completely, I mean, what you're saying is just right on and very practical. So there's so many things. So we're halfway through already. So if you do have questions, please put them on. There's so many different ways I want to go right now, Chris, because you talked about data science and the bias that's in data science, and I would love to go there. So I hope to reserve a couple minutes to maybe ask you one question there. But I also want to retain the sort of the angle here of the technology firm or supplier or vendor partner angle. So some of the questions that we had to do with, is it difficult? Do you believe it's more difficult being Black or a minority firm? I know I don't believe you're a part of a minority-owned firm, but you could speak to it as well, or just being Black representative of the firm. Do you think it's harder to get in, make the sale, make the relationship, make the partnership? Do you think there's obstacles there that exist today?
There are obstacles, and the mileage varies on those. But ultimately, like when thinking about that, I don't want to name any names or say like go into into any specifics. It's just there's just a barrier in experience that you have, and I think the biggest challenge is, let's take an incident. Let's take George Floyd's killing in May earlier this year. If you know that there are people who have different opinions, and those people are in positions of power, like if you say something like Black Lives Matter, and you know that you're going to get responded to with like a condescending All Lives Matter type response, then it makes you much less likely to express your beliefs or have a way to talk about the scenarios. You'll be in other scenarios as well where topics come up like those subjects, and on the one hand you have your personal dignity and the beliefs that you have, and on the other hand you have the professional relationships that you've forged. And a lot of the time Black professionals will choose to be silent, and if you're one among many, like if you're like the completely solid minority in a group of people who think in a different way, then it becomes much harder to speak up on those issues. So one big reason that I'm here is because I was like that for years, and I've decided to think from a different perspective now, which is rather than being fixated on who might be off-put by my opinion on a shooting, or or some tragedy that has happened, rather than think about who might be off-put. It's thinking about who you're building together as a community, who is coming together with you to discuss these issues. And I mean, it's not something that's going to be 100% comparable for everybody. I don't think that most people, a lot of people would be comfortable coming on, having a conversation and sharing personal stories, but it's all like if you can switch the thinking from like from the position of fear to the position of like, I want to build this community. I want to build a group of people that are around me and accept me and my views. Then it becomes a much easier thought to have.
Yeah. So again, I want to flip it. So you're now on the other side. What would you recommend? So you are a non-Black, you say white CIO, and you have a lot of these technology firms that you work with. Would you be proactive with your teams to really address this so that you ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity, to become a vendor, to become a technology firm partner? Do you sort of hear what I'm saying? It's like, do you take a proactive stance, or do you just step back and let things happen the way they might?
Gosh, it's a really hard question, right? Because if you're taking a proactive stance, then that means that you are going and making a decision. You're consciously looking for a relationship or a friendship or a partnership with somebody of a different race. So it makes it a really hard question, because like everybody wants to focus on, well, I want the absolute best provider at the service, or best employee, or what have you. But the other part of that question is that eliminating racism, eliminating bias is not something that is just going to happen randomly. There's all kinds of there's bias within an organization and in other aspects of society that are resulting in that pool of people that are coming for you to interact with. So the only way the way to fight the bias is not to continue the cycle that's being brought on by the rest of society, but to be intentional, to combat racism and to combat uneven hiring processes, or working with minority vendors. It requires looking out into those fields specifically. There are a lot of, like, even outside of healthcare IT, outside of just the employee basis, there's just so much culture that doesn't make it to the mainstream, but is extremely respectable, extremely awesome, extremely powerful, but is just so significantly and so commonly overlooked. So if you are not intentional about fighting racism, or like fighting the bias in the organization, if you're not intentional about it, then what it might feel like the classic trolley problem, where you figure out if you're going to move the trolley that runs over somebody versus keeps going and runs over even more people. If you're just coasting, then you're on that trolley that's going to run over more people, because what you're doing is you're accepting the bias that's inherent in society, and you're saying, well, I'm just going to continue that cycle.
Yeah, no, that's good observation. I always like to make the point also related to this, that if you look, because we've talked about this with other guests, if you always just hire, because you say, I'm going to hire the best person, and you may end up with 5 best persons on your team, that doesn't necessarily make a good team. And so, some of the guests have mentioned, and you're sort of talking about this as well, that there is power in diversity, in all aspects of diversity. And if you're all the same, I always tell people, if you're all the same, there's a bunch of Ed Marxes, man, you're in big trouble. You want Chris, you want Ed working together, and others. That makes for a more powerful team than any, and it's the same with the vendor community. See, that's where I'm coming from. It's like you have to think about all of them working together as well, and just the power that you get in diversity. So Chris, we could talk for hours, so I'm going to leave you with the last question, which is going to be easy but hard because it's very open. So, you know, we've been preparing for this. We've talked about this, I think it was maybe 2 months ago. And so I'm going to let you end this with whatever you want to share. So, you know, you have an audience, you know, we'll have between the live and the recording, a couple hundred individuals. You know, what would you say as a Black man professional in healthcare IT on the technology firm side? What would you say? What would be your last piece of advice or encouragement, or however you want to express it?
The angle I'm going to come from is what's helped me the most, which at the beginning of the conversation I said asking why, but I actually saw a really good quote on that this morning from data scientist Harpreet Sahota. But it is fight criticism with curiosity, rather than like when being criticized or when problems are being pointed out. Again, fight criticism with curiosity. Ask why. Look into the scenario. The jumping on the defensive is just a way to defend the status quo, a way to protect yourself against the scary concept of having to grow or change in some kind of way. But asking why, investigating other people's perspectives, building a solid basis for empathy will improve relationships. And it's not only limited to the racial bias sphere. Fighting criticism with curiosity, asking why, thinking from somebody else's perspective, that's important from all aspects of life. So I think that would be that would be a powerful start.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And I just encourage everyone who's listening to these conversations to have your own conversations as well. Talk to people, right, Chris? You wouldn't care if I came up to you as a colleague and asked you questions, you know, hey, help me understand. As a Black person, I'm not a Black person, help me understand what's going on. Help me understand how you feel about what's happening in society or in health IT. What can I do? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll let you actually answer that question. But I have the sense, because obviously we're having that conversation, that that's something you would encourage.
We're having that conversation, and I could encourage that for me, but I can't speak for everybody else, because the scenario that a lot of people are in is, let's say that you're one of 4 Black people on a team of 600 people, and then you like, nobody wants to be, well, not nobody, I can't speak for everybody, but you should not make somebody a spokesperson for the entire Black race. So
yeah,
it's okay to ask people on their perspectives, but there's a line that should be respected, where people don't feel like they're having to answer for every opinion. So I mean, there are people like me who I'm glad to entertain conversations and glad to be engaged. But a lot of the research and a lot of the things that people can do and should do, it's going to depend heavily on them. And when asking people those questions, it just becomes really important to be wary of, am I crossing the line? Am I making this person feel pressure to answer in a particular way? Because a lot of the scenarios, it's something to be aware of. Like, if you're in a position of power and somebody else isn't, a lot of what they're saying, a lot of their response is going to be fueled towards trying to appease you rather than giving you the accurate answer, and then it's putting burden on them.
Yeah, that's really good and very reasonable. I'll just say in closing that I talk to my colleagues, and I'm telling you, we all are. This is an issue that we all have responsibility for, and being proactive and taking action. And you can't sit around and say it doesn't apply to me, because it does apply to you. So just join me in doing everything that we can to eliminate racism, especially in our sphere of influence. Because again, I believe if we start with our sphere of influence, it'll grow out from there. So I want to thank you, Chris, for being our guest. Awesome insights. Thank you for your friendship. And with that, I think we're going to head to the last slide as our 30 minutes ends. So we have some upcoming webinars. Digital transformation. The book is finally out. We've been talking about digital transformation in healthcare for 6 or 7 months. A book finally came out. So we're going to talk about the book. Also, what we can learn from other industries. So we have guests coming up from CIOs that have been CIOs of the world's most famous airports that are now going to healthcare and learn what's happened, how to apply the same sort of principles and all about the experience. And then we also talk about human-centered design and webinars coming up. And we continue, because I told you, I promised from the very beginning, this is not a one and done thing on race. It's going to take a lot of dialogue, and we have to keep the dialogue going in perpetuity until this thing is solved. So, Chris, I'll let you say goodbye. Thanks again.
All right, yeah, goodbye. Thanks for having me. And again, continuing to fight bias, that's something that I do internally as well. So I just want everybody to know, like, nobody's free from that as a problem. There are no angels. 100%, we should all be checking our own biases.
All right, excellent conclusion. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.